the evidence about the link between the gut and brain just continues to grow and grow. This is the most nutrient-dense diet I have ever analyzed.
So Dr. Wahls, you've had an extraordinary story that has revolutionized the way you practice and the way the rest of the world thinks about MS and neurodegenerative disease. And sadly, you had a debilitating disease, and it led you to discover a way of treating these conditions like MS with a whole new paradigm. And so I'd love for you to share your story and tell us a little bit about what happened, how you discovered this, and what, as a result, you learned.
So I'm an academic internal medicine doc. In 2000, I was diagnosed with relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis. And being an academic doc, I thought I should treat my disease aggressively. So I sought out the best MS center I could find, the Cleveland Clinic, took the newest drugs, and still within 3 years, my disease had converted to secondary progressive MS.
Which is not good.
Which is not good at all, because that means you're going to go steadily downhill. That functions once lost are gone forever. And so that is when I took mitochondria, a form of chemotherapy. Then I took Tysabri, the new biologic agent.
To suppress your immune system.
To suppress my immune system. And I continued to decline. And that is when I realized, conventional medicine is not stopping this decline. I was on track to quite potentially becoming bedridden by my illness, potentially demented by my illness. MS-related pain was a big part of my illness, and that was getting more and more difficult to control. So I was worried that refractory pain was going to be a big factor. And so that's when I went back to reading the medical literature and would discover the ancestral health movement. I would discover, vitamins and supplements. I would discover the Institute for Functional Medicine, and I would integrate all of that into a comprehensive diet and lifestyle program that not only stopped my decline, which was pretty incredible, but to my amazement and the amazement of my physicians, was associated with a remarkable return of function.
So you were in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
And it was only a one-way street, worse.
As in a wheelchair, I couldn't sit up anymore. I was in a zero gravity chair where I was fully reclined, knees higher than my nose. I struggled to walk 10 feet using 2 walking sticks. I was losing my keys, my phone. I had the severe MS pain, was having to go to the pain clinic, take frequent Solu-Medrol to try and control the pain.
Powerful steroids.
So life was very tough. And that's where I was in 2007. I was still doing my little tiny workouts, like a 10-minute, very simple little stomach curl. If I did 12 minutes, I couldn't function for a day and a half. But I could do 10 minutes and go to work. In 2008, after doing my diet and lifestyle protocol, I was able to do a 20-mile bike ride with my family. That's how much transformation had happened in that 12-month period. So that, of course, changes how I think about disease and health. It changes the way I practice medicine. And it would start me on this new path, and ultimately would change the focus of my clinical research.
Extraordinary. One of the things you discovered was that there's a part of our cells that's required for energy. And by the way, you had terrible energy. That's a classic feature of MS. It's just you're fatigued all the time. You discovered that these little parts of the cells called mitochondria, it's like the energy powerhouse of the cell, were critically important. And they were part of the therapy that you used to treat the mitochondria through diet and other things. So tell us, why are the mitochondria so important in neurodegenerative disease?
Well, the mitochondria are the little bacteria that were engulfed by bigger bacteria about 1.5 billion years ago. And they were very efficient at converting energy from the food we ate into the biochemical energy that our cells use. And that would allow cells to become multicellular, to develop organs, tissues, locomotion. It would let us develop brains, hearts, retinas, etc. And the cells that need the most energy, which are our brain cells, our retina, and our heart cells, have like 10,000 mitochondria per cell.
Yeah, and the heart has, I think, 17,000. Right?
So it's just so critical. And if your mitochondria are not working very well, then that organ doesn't work very well. So in the brain, that means that you begin to have problems with fatigue, with pain, with irritability, with cognitive decline. And so, that was actually one of the first things I discovered when I'd gone back to start reading the science, was that mitochondria were at the heart of neurodegeneration for Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, ALS, Lou Gehrig's. No one was yet writing about that for MS, but I thought, you know what? I bet it's the same. So I'm going to learn everything I can about what I can do to tune up my mitochondria. And so that was the initial interventions that I did, which was a variety of vitamins and supplements to support my mitochondria. Now, when I was first reading about that, Mark, what I was able, I had this supplement cocktail, creatine, lipoic acid, carnitine, B vitamins, CoQ. And after about 6 months, I thought, it's not helping and I'm wasting my money. So I quit and I couldn't get out of bed. I was just completely exhausted. And 3 days later, my spouse comes in and says, honey, I think I got to take these again. And I took them and I could get up and function again. And that was very interesting to me. So 2 weeks later, I did the same thing, stopped all my supplements, couldn't function. And 3 days later, I started them and I could function again. So my conclusion was, they may not be recovering me, but they're clearly doing something for my fatigue. And that was very energizing, very exciting, because this also taught me that the mitochondria were important. And my neurologist and my primary care doc were not telling me stuff like this. So I could be teaching myself by using PubMed and reading the literature and beginning to do the self-experimentation. Mm-hmm. So it was a very big discovery.
So great. So how do you take care of your mitochondria? If they're responsible for contributing to the symptoms and the disease states of the neurodegenerative state, and even things like autism and many other diseases, we may not have the mitochondria be the cause, but it's a big factor that gets damaged when you have the problem. So how do you recover your mitochondria? So
there are three things that I think about. The first one is what's the nutritional need for that mitochondria? So the mitochondria, if you remember from ninth grade biology, there's the little oval with a lot of squiggles in the middle, and that's the cell membrane. So this mitochondria has a lot of cell membrane, which means it has a lot of fat. So you need the right fats, a lot of omega-3s, omega-6 fats to make healthy membranes. You're going to need a lot of B vitamins, and that's essentially the whole B vitamin family to support some of those enzymatic steps. You need a bunch of minerals like zinc, magnesium as cofactors for a lot of those B vitamins, some sulfur amino acids as well, antioxidants. So there's really important nutrition that you need for those mitochondria. The next thing you need to think about is why did the mitochondria begin to not function very well? The most common reason is that they've been poisoned, and it can be poisoned by things like heavy metals, lead, mercury, arsenic, pesticides will do that, the insecticides will do that, some plastics and solvents. So poisoning is the most common thing. And then the third category would be some of the stealth infections, where an infectious particle has sort of hijacked the mitochondria and taken it away from manufacturing energy to manufacturing viral particles. So address those three factors, and you go far in restoring that mitochondrial health.
That's so great. The other thing, I think might affect the mitochondria and also the immune system. And, I had a patient with MS many years ago, and, I found I learned the most from just listening to my patients more than any textbook. And this woman said, when my gut symptoms get worse, my MS gets worse. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. So I began to sort of work on the gut, and people would get better. And I'm curious what you think about the role of the gut in MS and also neurodegenerative disease and how it affects the mitochondria.
So the evidence about the link between the gut and brain just continues to grow and grow and grow. You can go into PubMed.gov and put in microbiota and MS, and there's more papers coming out. You can put in microbiota and autoimmune conditions, and you'll find that there are more and more papers identifying that you have a different mix of bacteria living in your gut if you've got an autoimmune condition than if you're healthy. As they eat our food and each other's byproducts, they're secreting compounds that cross over into the blood, and then into the blood-brain barrier, and can increase inflammation. They can shift behavior. They can shift our mood, can shift our cognition. So that's clearly having an impact on the brain. Now, in terms of the mitochondria, one thing that they can do is, I believe about 25% of our detoxification capabilities are managed by our gut microbiome. And so if you have a healthy, vigorous microbiome, a health-promoting bacteria, you'll have improved detoxification, and you'll have less poisoning of your mitochondria.
Amazing. You had both an autoimmune and a sort of a neurologic condition. So you sort of had to attack from both ways. So a lot of the therapies that we use in autoimmune disease in this country are problematic. And you talked a lot about how there's a hidden cost to the therapy. And can you sort of tell us more about why physicians are just stuck on that and not telling the full story that you're telling? So,
there's a really interesting lecture by George Ebers. He's an MS researcher out of the United Kingdom and London. And he reviews that when we were looking at the development of drugs for MS, there was a big conference with the MS researchers. What measures should we monitor to decide that an MS drug is useful? And it's time to the diagnosis of secondary progressive, time to needing a cane, time to needing a walker, time to being bedridden, time to being dead. Because those are the things that really drive cost and suffering.
Yeah.
And in that research meeting, MRI findings, number of relapses, that was like number 19 and number 18 on the list of 20. So they were not thought to be important.
Because they just assume the disease is going to progress.
When you look at the epidemiological literature, number of relapses do not predict time to cane, walker, wheelchair, or death. Nor do they predict time to secondary progressive MS. And the number of relapses are very slightly protective. So MRI lesions come and go. And they don't appear to have a very clear relationship to, are you going to become disabled? Are you going to develop secondary progressive? Are you going to need a cane? Are you going to need a wheelchair? Are you going to become bedridden?
Yeah.
And I'm not surprised because what I think likely is going on is the neurodegeneration, which is probably driven by mitochondria.
Yeah.
It's probably driven by nutritional status and nutritional deficiencies. Now, of course, none of that is going to be treated by suppressing the immune cells, because the immune cells are trying their hardest to repair my brain. They are trying their hardest to come in and quiet that inflammation and to begin to remyelinate. So, it's sort of interesting when we looked at our studies, we saw that the people who were the least likely to have improvement in gait were the folks on taking disease-modifying drugs.
So the drugs that are supposed to help you actually
may not
didn't
be so
help
helpful.
you.
May not be so helpful. You can turn off these acute lesions. Yes, you can do that. And the drugs are very effective at that. But what we don't know is, will they really change the time to wheelchair, the time to bedridden?
Yeah. And you got from bedridden almost to riding your bike 20 miles.
To biking 20 miles.
So you've taken your learnings and your personal experience, and you've sort of not just sort of taken your goodies and go home. You really stepped up and created a research program at university looking at this approach, not just to MS, but to many other kinds of patients.
Correct.
With all sorts of conditions. So what is going on with your research, and how do you do it within the center, and what are we learning from your work?
So first thing that we had a case series where we used the E-stem, and I did that with the physical therapist, and we were able to show that we had improved gait and mobility, and so we got that published. And then the next thing we did, we had a little phase 1 feasibility study where we had other people with progressive MS. So again, people who spontaneous recovery is not going to happen. You'd expect them to steadily decline. So we enrolled people with secondary or primary progressive, and we had 20 folks. We were able to show that, yes, they could implement this complicated diet and lifestyle program that I utilized. The biggest side effect, Mark, was if you were overweight, you lost weight without being hungry.
Oh my God.
That's a serious side effect. We had the largest reduction in fatigue severity that's been reported today in the most severely disabled group that's been studied today.
Yeah.
So that was very exciting. So we got that up and going. We then did a small pilot study, and people where we randomized and had folks who got the study diet or were randomized to not get the study diet for 12 weeks, and then they got the study diet. We're able to show, once again, that fatigue severity was statistically and clinically significantly reduced in the people who had the study diet compared to control. Function in the hands improved, both dominant and non-dominant hand, and walking ability improved, and the how far you could walk in 6 minutes improved. Then we got some more money. We're able to go back and analyze. I have lots of data from that first group of progressive MS folks. So we're able to analyze the change in mood and cognition. So we're able to show that, again, in progressive MS, we don't expect anybody to improve their thinking or their mood because they have a progressive disease. We're able to show that anxiety scores diminished, so they were less anxious. Depression scores diminished, so they were less depressed. And that verbal and nonverbal reasoning scores improved. Again, very surprising in a progressive disease. We have MRI data in this group that we are working on analyzing. So I'm hoping to have that available. We have our videos that we have before and after, and we had videos of their walking every 3 months. And we have that analyzed. I have that paper in press, and I'm hoping that press, it'll finally be out probably in either June or July. And what would be very nice about that, Mark, is the videos, because I put it in an open access paper, the public will be able to see those videos now too.
That's amazing. That's so impressive. So what are the other factors like stress and how those impact in sleep and exercise? Yeah. Can you talk about those and how they're part of your program?
So in the program, we talk about how important it is to address stress. And I'm going to step back a little bit. For years, I ran a therapeutic lifestyle clinic. In that clinic, we took all comers, MS, neurological disease, mental health disease, medical problems. And I do see them in a group, and we do a timeline. And one of the most common things that I saw, Mark, was stress was the trigger that made people be symptomatic. And so I learned that we need to teach people how to engage in a stress-reducing practice. So I saw that in all disease states. Now, when we went back and analyzed it, as I said, we had a little more data so we could look at the mood and cognition data. We looked at the associations between the diet, the foods that we wanted them to eat, the foods we told them to exclude, the stress-reducing practice, the exercise, and electrical stimulation. The strongest associations were between not eating the stuff I told you to not eat, eating all those vegetables that I told you to eat, and then stress reduction, and they were very strongly, had very strong association, p-values of less than 0.0001. Stress reduction was slightly associated, but it was still more important than either the exercise or the STEM. And I was actually quite surprised by that. I had fully expected that exercise and STEM would be most.
So what was the stress reduction tools you gave to the patients?
It was incredibly simple. We taught them how to do a self-massage of their face, hands, and feet.
That was it?
So that was one. And the other was a mantra-based meditation, sort of soft belly, focusing on the word soft and belly as they inhaled and exhaled, and that they were visualizing the flow of air through the nostrils, in and out.
Yeah.
They were probably getting a whopping 5 to 7 minutes of a stress-reducing activity every day.
Unbelievable.
So
if they did 20 minutes, then who knows what would happen, right?
Correct. But keep in mind, I was asking people to do a lot of stuff. So we had taken away the food that they loved, had them eat foods they didn't know how to eat before, so we taught them how to eat vegetables. We were having them do e-stim, and we were having them exercise. And so they were spending hours a day doing everything that we asked them to do.
So let's talk about the diet part of it, because I think that it's going to be surprising to most people what you recommend, because it's contrary to the most commonly given advice around diet. And yet it's profound, and it seems to be impacting not only MS, but Alzheimer's, Parkinson's disease, all kinds of neurologic issues. So tell us about that, though.
Sure. So, as I was going downhill, my Cleveland Clinic docs told me about Lauren Cordain's work in the paleo diet.
They did?
So in 2002, Lael Stone mentioned that to me. I don't think she quite understood what it was that she had said, because I went to the websites, read the book, like, okay. So after 20 years of being a vegetarian, I gave up all grain, all legumes, all dairy, a lot of prayer and meditation. I went back to eating meat, and continued to go downhill. But I stayed with it because I was doing something. And that, I thought, okay, who knows how long this takes to recover. And I've been going downhill for a long time. At least I'm doing something. Then I'm adding the vitamins and the supplements. And, eventually, after getting a little more comprehensive understanding with functional medicine, I had this insight like, I should take this long list of nutrients that I'm taking in pill form and figure out where they are in the food supply. And instead of focusing on what not to eat from the paleo world, I should focus on what I need to be eating to feed my brain. So then I was on this mission to, okay, what are the micronutrients that my brain needs? And ultimately, again, more research to get that sorted out. So that takes several more months. And the program is lots of vegetables. So,
oh my God.
Lots and lots of vegetables.
Did you research that to make sure it was safe?
Well, what's funny is when I did my clinical studies, I did have to show the IRB that this crazy diet that I was advocating was safe because it was so different than the USDA My Healthy Plate diet.
Yeah.
And so I was required to do a safety study to show that 9 cups of vegetables was safe.
Unbelievable.
So and so we did do that, and the dietitian who, and so I had to keep these detailed food records of what I was eating, for a week. We did these analyses, and the dietitian who did those analyses for us, who had been doing dietary research for, I think 25 years, said, Terry, this is the most nutrient-dense diet I have ever analyzed.
Yeah.
And so we're like 2 to 8 times more nutrient dense than the average American intake for these various vitamins, antioxidants, minerals.
And you found out that there were, certain things in food that make a huge difference, like sulfur and iodine.
Yeah.
That you were able to analyze the food and figure out what to eat to give you those nutrients.
Correct. And so I designed this as I was constructing the diet. I decided like, okay, I got to chase these nutrients, figure out what my brain needs. I also had the insight like, biotransformation is probably really important to help resuscitate my mitochondria and help me get rid of whatever toxins I have from all of my toxic exposures growing up on the farm, et cetera.
And biotransformation means
the processing, eliminating of the heavy metals, the lead, mercury, arsenic, the atrazine that I'm sure is in the groundwater from the farm, and all the years of pesticide and the formaldehyde, and the mercury that had been in my mouth for all those years. So as I was researching what my brain needs and my mitochondria need, I also researched what can I do to maximize the efficiency of my detoxification enzymes, particularly phase 1, phase 2. And so brassica family, so the organic sulfur in the cabbage family of vegetables, in the onion family of vegetables, were a big part of that protocol.
Yeah, they can handle stuff. And iodine, you mentioned, is in fish and seaweed.
Fish and seaweed. And so seaweed was big, as very big on fermented foods, again, for the microbiome aspect. And the ancestral health folks had gotten me keen, pretty fired up about organ meats. And as I'm, understanding the dietary needs of the brain more, one of the things I discovered is vitamin K, which you and I learned was all about blood clotting, but vitamin K2 is all about myelin in the brain. Well, if you got a problem with MS, you need a lot more myelin. So I need vitamin K2. And where do you get K2? You get it from liver. And you get it from eating a lot of greens. And the bacteria in your bowels have to convert that vitamin K from the greens into vitamin K2 and K7 that your small bowel will absorb.
And you need the right bacteria.
To
synthesize vitamin K, and you can get it from food, but it's really important. Yeah.
And the way to sort out do you have the right bacteria, actually I sort of laugh about this. We have pooping class in my lifestyle class, because we talk about how important it is to look at your poop and are you pooping rocks? Are you pooping snakes? Are you pooping pudding? Are you pooping tea? So we all sit in our chairs.
That's very graphic.
We poop together, then we stand up, we turn around, we look into our toilet chairs and take turn talking to each other about our poop and what to do if you
Why don't you just take pictures of it?
Well,
it's group poop, I
don't know. Well, we do have the Bristol stool chart, so we have that in front of us as well.
I don't know. Group poop is a therapy. I don't know.
We try to have a lot of laughter and fun, and so these group pooping classes, people are laughing pretty hard.
Very impressive, Dr. Wahls. You must be a compelling salesman for that technique. Yes, you mentioned, vitamin K, you mentioned sulfur, you mentioned iodine. Vitamin D seems to be a big factor in MS. And
vitamin D is really important. Vitamin D, so if we look at the north-south gradation, the further you get from the equator, the higher the rates of MS and Alzheimer's, by the way. And part of the assumption is that our vitamin D levels are declining the further we get from the equator. And of course, so some studies have shown epidemiologically that as your vitamin D level is lower, your rates of MS are higher. There are other studies that have shown if you treat people with vitamin D, the rates of relapse are lower. So that's certainly a factor. And vitamin D also speaks to over 1,000 genes, and your brain is filled with vitamin D receptors. So we want people to fix their vitamin D. In all of our studies, we give them vitamin D and we monitor their levels. And I tell them, please go out and get a tan without a sunburn, because when light hits your skin, yes, you do make vitamin D, but it is also an immune modulator, independent of your vitamin D level. So I still think there's utility in having sun exposure.
So you might not get MS, but you get wrinkles.
You may get wrinkles. You may get wrinkles, yes. But you'll get far fewer wrinkles if you're having bone broth and lots of vegetables.
So bone broth, what is that, and why should we be drinking it?
So, this was a very traditional food it's bones, a little vinegar, some sea salt, and we like to put in all seaweed, and we simmer it all day long. The vinegar helps draw the minerals out, so it's going to be a very nice mineral-rich concoction. If you put in things like chicken feet, great source of collagen and gelatin, which can help heal your gut and help give your cells more of the collagen. And collagen is a very basic stratus compound that is a structure that is ubiquitous in our connective tissue. So it's a very basic structure.
And it's gut healing too, right?
Very good for our gut.
Great. So you created something called the Wahls protocol. Can you tell us what the steps of that are and what that is? Because I think people are interested in learning about how to implement this.
When I devised my diet and lifestyle program, I did all of that to try and slow my decline. I had no hope of recovery. And then when I had this unexpected side effect of recovery, it certainly changed how I practiced. And after a few months, I decided to call our local food co-op, and I said, how about give a talk?
Yeah.
And it was a huge success. And as I began teaching the public, I realized that the public was hungry for all of this. And so I ended up deciding to create a book and to teach these concepts. As I was teaching the concepts, I realized that I couldn't just have these lists of foodstuffs in my mind. I needed to have a teachable method so I could teach my patients in my clinics and I could teach the public. And so I codified that into what I call the Wahls protocol. So we have the diet, the foods that you need to eat. So lots of vegetables, green, sulfur, color.
So there are 3 categories, right?
3 big categories.
Dark green leafy vegetables.
Green leafy vegetables to get all that vitamin K going, and the carotenoids and magnesium, so great source there. The sulfur-rich vegetables, cabbage family, onion family, mushroom family, and that helps with detoxification, it helps with intracellular glutathione, it helps with making neurotransmitters, and then the deeply pigmented, and pigment's a great source of a good marker for antioxidants.
So eat the rainbow.
Eat the rainbow.
Yeah. The other aspects of the protocol, besides the colorful fruits and vegetables.
So we remove things that are particularly inflammatory. So the gluten-containing grains, so wheat, rye, barley. We remove the dairy protein. You can have clarified butter, but all other forms of dairy we take out. And I also take out eggs because eggs are probably the 3rd most common unrecognized food sensitivity. So that's the food part.
So it's also a very high fat diet and a low carb diet.
Yeah, so the average American has about 250 grams of carbs. My diet, depending on which level you're at, may be 100 grams down to 50 grams of carbs. And these are pretty non-starchy carbs. So we have less carbs, and I want people to have more fat. I want them to have omega-3 fats, flax oil, hemp oil would be fine. Avocados would be great. If you're more ketogenic, then I encourage things like coconut oil or medium chain triglycerides. Clarified butter is good.
Or ghee, right?
Ghee, yeah, that's great. And I'm okay with people eating chicken skin. I'm okay with having fattier cuts of meat because our cells, and membrane, the cell membrane wraps around the axons or the nerve wiring to make myelin. 70% of that cell membrane is saturated fat and cholesterol. So cholesterol has gotten this terrible rap, but we need it to make our hormones, including vitamin D, and we need it to make our cell membranes, so we need it to make myelin.
Yeah, I had a neurosurgeon at clinic once tell me, I don't know why anybody would take statins if you're a neurosurgeon. You know what it does to the myelin and to the nerve cells and sheets.
Yeah, I'm very, very comfortable with people having fat. I think it's a very critical part of brain health is to have enough fat.
So what are the other aspects of the protocol besides the 3 different categories of veggies, the good fats, the low sugar and carbs?
And want to be sure that there's enough protein. And while many people don't have enough protein in their diet, I was a vegetarian, vegan for many years. It's clearly not enough protein, probably low in B12 as well. So I prefer that people have some fish or poultry. I do have some strategies for vegetarian and vegans because I do recognize that there are vegetarian and vegans for spiritual beliefs and religious beliefs. So we have some separate programs for them to help them do that more safely. We are very keen on fermented foods. Again, to help populate the gut with a diverse set of microbes. And if you have fermented foods, you get many more different species of microbes than you're going to get in your probiotic capsule. So much better to learn how to ferment. Sauerkraut, kimchi, kombucha. I teach people how to make fermented chia seed pudding, how to take. Oh, actually, it's quite delicious. And then we get coconut milk, and we show people how to make fermented coconut milk cheese, fermented yogurt, fermented kefirs, and fermented beets, fermented carrots, fermented radishes. So lots of ways to have fermented foods, and that can be fun and easy. I encourage them to begin using seaweed. Our ancestors would have traveled great distances to have seaweed, or would have traded to get seaweed. And they certainly recognized that it was very important for the reproductive health of the clan, that the young men and women who they wanted to have kids got the seaweed.
Because it had iodine, and you need it for your thyroid, and if your thyroid's not working, you can't get pregnant.
Exactly, exactly. So we have those things. And then I also talk about the benefits of ketosis and why that is something to consider. And so we have some strategies to get people in ketosis.
Which is not eating much carbs and actually
having more fat.
More fat and burning the fat instead of the carbs for fuel.
Correct. Now, the ketogenic diet is very, has a long history. It's been used to treat epilepsy. It started, I think, about 1919 out of the Mayo Clinic. And Johns Hopkins got it going again in the 1960s. But they have a dairy-based ketogenic diet with only 20 grams of carbs and wreck people's microbiome. They wreck their hormonal balance. They have to use a lot of supplements because it's so nutritionally unsound. And unfortunately, a lot of people are using the ketogenic diet, dairy-based, again, with only 20 grams of carbs. And they have a lot of health benefits initially, but I have concerns that over time they'll develop nutritional deficiencies. The hormonal imbalance will get to be a problem. So I'd much rather they use a medium-chain triglyceride-based, like coconut oil, coconut milk, or so you can do that. If you don't like coconut or coconut disagrees with you, you can do it using olive oil, but then you're going to have to restrict your calories. And so this is a lot tougher. So now you're eating once a day or every other day. And once you're in ketosis, eating every other day really is actually pretty comfortable. And I'll eat once a day or every other day when I'm in ketosis, and it's very comfortable. I'll sometimes eat every 3 days for a longer fast. But that is not easy in the beginning. You have to, very gradually ease your way into
Not
that.
eating doesn't sound fun.
No. So I think for most people, it's easier to do it with a medium-chain triglyceride on a ketogenic diet.
Powerful. And so you can be on a ketogenic diet if it's more well-designed so that you don't end up with it. So you don't necessarily have to become nutritionally deficient. You can do a healthy version of it.
And when I designed my diets, so I have level 1, 2, and 3. Level 3 is the ketogenic diet. We went back and did a nutritional analysis of each level to verify it was nutritionally sound, that you do have enough fiber, you can maintain a healthy microbiome. And so, yes, you certainly can if you're following our protocol. If you're doing a dairy-based ketogenic diet, I think you're at definite risk of long-term problems.
So the other thing I want to cover is what your experience is with the resistance to your ideas, because you did a TED Talk and had some challenges around that, as you mentioned. And I think that you've been able to work in a major university to implement this, which is a huge breakthrough. But there's still a lot of resistance. And can you talk about why that is and what kind of resistance you've encountered with this groundbreaking idea?
Well, I certainly have had lots of resistance. And I think some of the reasons I'm successful is, one is I'm a little socially not attuned. So I've always been sort of into, I do my own thing, I just do what I think is right, and I can let the world roll off my back. So I think that was critical to my success. Early on, when I had this transformation, I had gotten assigned to the Traumatic Brain Injury Clinic, which, by the way, I was assigned to that, I'm sure, as an attempt to force me to take medical retirement, because I was assigned to that in 2007. And I went home, told my family, and my spouse said, there's no way you can do that job. And I knew there was no way I could do that job because I was going to be seeing traumatic brain injury patients without residence, and I just physically would not be able to do that. And they said I'd start that at the end of January 2008. Well, as it turned out, by the end of January 2008, I could do that job. And so I'm helping in the Traumatic Brain Injury Clinic, but unlike my colleagues who were saying, well, there's nothing you can do, I'm like, Well, as a matter of fact, there is a lot you can do. We can teach you how to eat a more nutrient-dense diet. We're going to teach you how to meditate. I'm going to talk with you about exercise. I'm going to have you do Epsom salt baths, get a pedometer and start walking. And my chief of staff calls me and says, Terry, people are really upset. What are you doing? Yeah, and so...
Can you please not help them?
So I took down 85 different papers to say, okay, this is what I'm doing and why. And he's like, well, but it's still not FDA approved. And I'm like, well, okay. And I'm happy to do only what's FDA approved if you'll send out an email to all of my partners here at the university that's the only way that we can treat our patients is using FDA approved treatment protocols so we can no longer use the latest science.
Right.
And I stopped and smiled. And they goes, okay, I see you have a point. And he actually would become a huge fan of mine. He started telling folks who were criticizing me, saying, okay, if Terry harms somebody, we'll do a peer review, we'll see what's going on. But vegetables are not a problem. Meditation are not a problem. Exercise is not a problem. So
is meditation FDA approved?
No, that's the whole point. So he became a huge fan. And in fact, he then a couple years later would give me 2 unfunded days to do my research. So my chief of staff became very, very supportive. The chair of medicine at the university, when he saw my recovery, he gave me the job of writing a case report, which writing a case report on yourself is not an easy task, but I got it done and we got it published. And then he called me back and said, okay, we need to do a little clinical trial. And so that took about a year to get that through and got that going. And I could not get it through the IRB because there's no safety data other than me. And he had become the dean of the medical school. And so he facilitated behind the scenes to let the IRB know that work with Wahls and the Physical Therapeutics Committee, she needs to be able to do this study. So then I met with the head of pharmacy and therapeutics, and we identified what were all the labs that have to do, who would have to exclude to be able to safely do the study. We got that study up and going. Then the next thing I started doing was, lecturing the public. And again, I got warned, like, you can't be doing this. You don't have any studies saying that this is really safe. So I got some coaching on how to more carefully talk about it. This is my experience. This is the scientific rationale. And you could talk to your personal physician, and if this makes sense, try it out and see how you respond. So I had to learn how to talk about it in a way that was culturally acceptable.
Yeah. Well, what an extraordinary story. You've gone from someone who's basically debilitated, almost on disability,
Oh, yeah.
to someone who's healed herself, to someone who's begun an initiative that educates patients and consumers, to being a research scientist, proving the concepts over and over again.
We had our little pilot studies going, and it was small private foundations that funded our work. So we're doing the little stuff, and the university is giving me PhD students and some grad students to work for free in my lab. And I'm writing grants to the NIH and the MS Society, and they're giving me scathing reviews like, clearly Dr. Wahls has no understanding about the pathophysiology of MS. But I keep writing anyway. And finally, we're having some preliminary data, and I still get these scathing reviews. But I published my book, The Wahls Protocol, which creates a firestorm in the MS world and drives a huge consumer interest in diet and lifestyle, which causes the MS Society to take notice and rearrange their research priorities.
Yeah.
And
I talked to them a decade ago, and it was just like talking to a wall.
Well, I was a banned speaker because I was creating false hope.
There is no such thing
as false hope.
Hope is a medicine.
Hope is a medicine. But, I was a banned speaker, and my book comes out in 2014. And then in the fall of 2014, I get an email from the MS Society that they want me to come to their wellness meeting. And I'm a preliminary speaker at another event that same day. But I'm thinking, okay, well, this sounds sort of interesting. So I call the MS Society and say, do you know who you're inviting? I'm a banned speaker. And so they were very apologetic. No, yes, we know about you. We know about your work. We know we banned you. We're very apologetic. We really want you to come. So I rearranged with that other organization. So I spoke on a different day, and I went and helped them see the light.
Amazing. Well, thank you for your work and inspiration for so many people. And I'm sure we're going to see a lot more of what you're doing, and it's going to change how we think.
It's very exciting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Because I think if we had really good tests all the time, all along, we'd realize that most everybody has parasites, and they're in our gut for a reason. They really become a problem because there are some that are more pathogenic than others. But the real trick and trigger is, and I think why we see more parasitic based chronic disease is the immune system. If you have a hampered immune system, if your immune system is suppressed in any way or is out of balance, you're going to start to feel the impact of those parasites. And so, why do we have them? Because they're part of the biologic ecosystem that works for plants and animals and for humans as well. It's when you get a big dose of a pathogenic organism, you happen to be immune compromised at that period of time, it gives you that opportunity for that parasite to take hold in your intestine, and now you're going to have either an acute illness, and most people have experienced parasitic illness as acute, like, Campylobacter, Giardia, Shigella, Salmonella.
Those are bacteria though, those aren't parasites.
Well, those are bacteria, but your Giardia is your
Entamoeba.
Yeah, I was about the Entamoeba histolytica. Those are like two of the major ones. Yeah, amoebiasis. Those three, and those are the ones that people have experienced the most. And but the diagnosis to get to Giardia or Entamoeba histolytica, it can take months to years for somebody to figure out your chronic diarrhea is caused by one of those 2 or 3 parasites.
Yeah, I mean, I had a woman who had chronic fatigue, terrible irritable bowel, food sensitivity. She was like miserable. And she was like an extremely well-connected, wealthy woman who had access to the best medical care. And she had Giardia that she picked up somewhere, and she was miserable, and no one found it.
And it's very hard to find. I mean, you have to, one of the standard ways that it used to be used, and now I think they use capsules to go in and look for it. But they used to, go down into the intestine, and they'd be almost like fishing for the Giardia and see if they could pull any Giardia out and do biopsies. It's very difficult to diagnose. But we have new tests, but we'll talk about that.
Yeah, and people get parasites from water, from food. What kind of food and water?
Yeah. So you get it water, food. You can get it from meats, uncooked meats, and you can get it from your pets. So if you have a cat who's going out, happens to be an outdoor cat that likes to kill things. They're going to get parasites from the rodents and the small creatures that they eat. They're going to bring it back, and if you're not careful cleaning their litter box, then you're going to be at risk for getting a parasite. With cats, it's toxoplasmosis. I actually have a patient who has schizophrenia, and I just did. Because I'm trying to find out a root cause, I did testing, and I tested him for toxoplasmosis antibodies, and he had very high antibodies of toxoplasmosis. And there's a link between toxoplasmosis and mental health disease, particularly schizophrenia.
Incredible.
Right? Even if it's treated. The inflammation and the antigenic nature of the toxoplasmosis has an ongoing impact on the brain in such a way that it can lead to the symptoms of schizophrenia. So It's interesting. It was an interesting case.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. So that sort of brings together, like a different train of thinking, which is these parasites are in your gut, but they can cause problems that have nothing to do with seemingly have nothing to do with your gut. And I remember one kid with autism who was really quite sick, but had a lot of gut issues. A lot of kids with autism have gut issues. And we're like, we'll treat let's look at stool. And he had Giardia. Yeah. And we treated that, and literally the kid's autism dramatically improved, started talking. I was like, whoa, the whole So talk about the ways in which these parasites are common, and what are the most common ones we see, and how do we sort of start to think about like what they're doing in the body? Because in a way, you can make a devil's advocate argument and say, well, we all grew up in nature and we weren't living in a sanitized hygiene world, and we all were exposed to parasites, and we all had worms and amoebas and bacteria. Like, maybe they have a role in our health.
Right.
Like,
So
are they all bad?
yeah, so they're not all bad. And so, since you brought it up, I mean, that's the hygiene hypothesis. And the hygiene hypothesis says that industrialized countries where we have sanitized everything, including our food, we have lost some of the important elements of our gut microbiome, particularly parasites. And there's mounting evidence that parasites actually have a important role in modulating in a positive way the immune system. That there are particular parasites there's a balance in your immune system. And there's an inflammatory side and anti-inflammatory side. And the parasites that are in our body actually produce certain proteins and long chain carbohydrates and fat molecules that will balance out the immune response, so that there's the T helper cells that are more inflammatory are shut down. Mm-hmm. And so that can limit autoimmunity. And we know that autoimmune illnesses and autoimmunity is the base of many of our chronic diseases.
Yeah.
And so there's more and more evidence that having a healthy microbiome that includes some parasites can be very helpful. And I know we're probably going to talk about this, but it's called Helminth therapy. And although, you don't hear a lot about it, it is becoming
It's a worm.
Yeah. Helminth is a worm. And they're being used to modulate the immune system. And I have a case that we'll talk about later in which I've used Helminth therapy. So that question mark about parasites, are they good or are they bad?
Yeah.
They're both.
It depends.
Both.
I mean, there's a really couple of good books. One is called Missing Microbes,
Mm-hmm.
Which is about the damage to our microbiome and the lack of the right bugs that keeps us healthy. And then one's called The Epidemic of Absence,
Right.
which is a brilliant book where this guy literally went to South America, Mexico, and was suffering from allergies and asthma and autoimmune issues and treated himself with worms and actually got better. It was fascinating. But, this is such a crazy idea that people are like, wow, treating people with worms, that sounds like we want to get rid of the parasites.
Right.
But it's a mixed bag, and you have to sort of figure out what's going on with the patient. So let's talk about obviously digestive symptoms, right? If you have a parasite, you have diarrhea, you can have bloating, you have gas, constipation, cramping, all that stuff.
Right. You're going to have increased appetite. You're going to feel like you're never full. You're going to have muscle ache, joint pain. You're going to have skin rashes, itching, hives. You're going to have brain fog, fatigue. And in real severe cases, when you have a 35-foot tapeworm hanging out in your gut, you could be anemic. Significantly anemic. Iron deficiency. It would be an iron deficiency.
Nutritional deficiencies. Yeah. I've even seen cystic acne being caused by parasites. So they're common, and they cause a lot of issues, and they can lead to all these autoimmune issues you mentioned. And there's a lot of bugs in your gut, right? There's bacteria, there's viruses, there's fungi, there's parasites, there's worms. Did I forget anything? Prions probably or something. And I think the it's a complex subject. It's a look at the ecosystem in a gut. So essentially it's like, if you're a functional medicine doctor, it's like you're being a rainforest ecologist. Yeah. There's all these different interactions and all these dynamic connections, but the problem is really common, and the diagnosis is often missed. But often when I see parasites, I feel like they really need to be treated.
Absolutely.
And so tell me about, how do we go about diagnosing this? What is wrong with traditional diagnosis?
Right.
How do we start to diagnose this?
Yeah. So, I just go back to that one comment you made, because I think it's really profound. And I just want to really make it the last statement on this, is that when you see parasites, you should be thinking immune system. And you should be thinking, something is amiss in the immune system. But you should also be thinking about the fact that there's the good side, and that we need to have a diverse microbiome that includes bacterial diversity, that includes parasitic diversity, because those organisms have evolved with us. They make compounds for us, and they educate our immune system. See, if we don't have parasites and we don't have bacteria, then our immune system doesn't know. It doesn't know what to respond to. And so when you now have a sterile diet and without the nutrients that you should have, and you're not eating fresh vegetables, and you're not eating grass-fed beef, you're not going to get the full complement of bacteria and even parasites that will educate your immune system. What will happen then is your immune system will then over-respond. It's been in isolation all these years. It almost has agoraphobia. It's afraid to go out of the house, and it goes out of the house, and all of a sudden it's at Gillette Stadium, and it's completely having a panic attack. And when it does that, it over responds. You get these autoimmune and inflammatory responses that lead to chronic disease. And so it's really important to understand that we need to eat our food from really healthy soil. We need to eat whole food and vegetables that have these organisms on it, because that's going to help us have a diverse gut microbiome that has an abundance of good bacteria that helps protect us. And parasites are part of that. So that's the good side, right? Now, on the bad side, when you do have that problem, we talked about some of the signs and symptoms. How do you get to that diagnosis when that person's had chronic diarrhea, or they've had this itching and this bloating, and now you're suspecting, okay, they've had all this testing done and nobody's figured it out. See, that is an advantage we have, because we are oftentimes the doctors of last resort. Yeah. And so I get to look at everything that's been done, and I get to say, you know what? They did this and that, but oftentimes in 20 years of practicing conventional medicine, I think I had one positive O&P test.
Yeah, one,
right. GI doctors, chronic diarrhea, let's do an O&P. So what the O&P is basically is you have somebody in a lab looking under a microscope at multiple slides of somebody's poop. You have to look at hundreds of slides to capture one.
Yeah, and good luck if you might not recognize the guy's not trained. And what if they're
you're right about that not trained. It's there are fewer and fewer lab techs.
Yeah.
That, we don't, if you and I saw, well, we'll probably get it, but if we wouldn't recognize smallpox because we've never seen it, right? So most of the techs these days, when they're trained, it's all on biochemical assays, and they're not getting the microscope, training and they don't see
them. It may
them.
not be as common, like in some of the bugs might not be as common here. So if you're in India and you're like a pathologist, you're looking, you probably see thousands of, I recognize that.
So using an O&P, so if somebody comes here and I've had ovum parasite test, I've had 3 of them, and I've been told I have no ovum parasites. Well, there's new technology called Qualitative Pcr. So what that does, it's going to look at the DNA material, look for DNA material of parasites. And it's going to be able to multiply it until you can measure it. That's what the PCR does. It's a polymerase chain reaction. So you get this DNA. It's kind of
all used for COVID, right?
Yeah. Exactly, for diagnosing the acute phase of COVID. So that test is very effective, and it's in part of one of the tests that we do to look at the gut microbiome. I use this one particular lab, and they do the quantitative PCR, and they're very, very sensitive. And they pick up parasites.
It's like 6,000 times more sensitive than looking at poop.
It is.
And the microscope.
It is.
That's
exactly
crazy, right? Okay,
so we have that diagnostic tool.
So let's talk about the approach to looking at parasites. We use a special test. We use what we call GI effects test here. It's a
GI map.
GI map.
I like the GI map because of its quantitative PCR. Yeah. It's very sensitive, almost too sensitive.
Yeah, it often picks up things that may not be actually.
But you get that with often.
So there's a difference between sensitivity and specificity in medicine. Sensitivity means if you have it, it will for sure find it.
Right.
But it can over-report it. Specificity means if you have this, it's for sure there. Like if you see
it's that thing. Right.
So it kind of might over-diagnose stuff on some of these PCR tests because you may have like a fragment of something, or it passes through, and it may not be a real problem.
And you use your clinical judgment and what's going on with the patient to really, and that's the cognitive process that we go through all the time. And we don't treat tests, we treat patients. Mm-hmm. But we use tests so we don't guess. So that's how it works.
Let's talk about then how we would really approach dealing with someone with chronic parasite infections. And then I want to get into talking about worms, because parasites and worms are quite different. I normally wouldn't give someone a parasite, but we sometimes in medicine are now giving people worms to treat disease.
Hyman therapy.
So talk about what is our approach? We do the diagnostic tests. What is our approach to treating a chronic parasitic infection? And we find them through these tests where other people don't find them.
So, we've gone through the process now. A patient comes in. We've clued into the fact that they have a parasite. We did great testing. We did the GI map. We found our parasite. And now what are we going to do? So there are, of course, in medicine, there are some drugs that you can use, but they are very potent and they have lots of side effects to them. And they, like you get more diarrhea, you can get more cramping, you can have hepatotoxicity with them. So you got to be really careful. They can be effective, and I've
like
used
Flagyl or Alinea.
Alinea, nitinol. But the two things I think about when I'm dealing with the parasite is if they have a symptomatic parasite, then their gut microbiome is significantly disordered, and you usually see not only the parasite, but you're also going to see other markers of disorder. You're going to see an overgrowth of pathogenic bacteria. You're going to see candida, because those are the markers of a disordered microbiome that will allow a parasite to really take hold and become pathogenic.
Yeah.
So I think first off, it's the 5 R's. So I need to get rid of the parasite. So we use botanicals. So the botanicals that are really helpful are oregano, herbs. So we use oregano, we use garlic, we use black walnut, we use wormwood. So I use
berberine,
grapefruit
extract,
and you can use them
papaya
individually.
seeds.
Yep, and you can use them in combination. There are some great combo treatments out there that will cover a host of your parasites and also treat those dysbiotic or pathogenic organisms. So the first thing I want to do is I want to start them on a therapy that's going to finally get rid of that organism, right?
Yeah.
So it's a direct attack on the organism. But then we have to look at the entire.
Before you do that, I just want to share a story. I was once giving a talk at Yale, and it was to a bunch of doctors and naturopaths, and we were talking about the gut, and I mentioned a parasite, a particular patient, and this naturopath got up because I was saying, well, I tend to use these drugs, and because I kind of tend to use drugs more for parasites, and he starts going on and on about all the herbs and how these herbs work against parasites, and a minute later, this other guy got up who was a naturopath as well, but he was an older guy. Yeah, he's like, the truth is, I'm a naturopath and I primarily use herbs, but often they don't work as well as the medications. So you can try herbs, but I wouldn't be afraid of the medications.
No,
this is a short-term thing that deals with the cause.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. I mean, irritable bowel is so prevalent and it's such a big problem for people.
Yeah.
And there's many causes of it, but sometimes it is a parasite. I had a patient recently who was a very famous lady, and she was really struggling with chronic gut issues. And we treated a parasite, and boom, she was instantly better.
Yeah. So again, Blastocystis hominis, which is a parasite, and another one called Entamoeba histolytica, they've both been implicated in IBS as triggers for IBS.
Irritable bowel, yeah.
Yeah. So you if you can't find a reason for somebody's IBS, and you should be looking for one, because IBS is just not the diagnosis, there's a trigger for it. You should, and you haven't been able to get to the bottom of it, you should be looking for those 2 parasites.
Unbelievable.
So we're treating, I will start with herbal therapies, and then I will advance to using pharmaceutical agents if necessary. But then I want to make sure the rest of their gut is working. So we look at their digestive processes. And oftentimes, why do we have the parasite? Because their digestive processes aren't working well. They're not making enough HCl in their stomach because they're under chronic stress. They might not be producing enough pancreatic enzymes. They may have some issues with their gallbladder that's limiting, and their liver that is limiting their production of bile or release of bile. So we want to make sure they have all their digestive enzymes. We want to make sure that their gut immune system is working well. So we want to create that environment. So besides treating, I'm going to want to make sure that they're getting the types of foods and supplements in their diet that will support a healthy gut microbiome. Good prebiotic foods, the cruciferous vegetables. I want them to make sure they're getting things like broccoli and asparagus and Brussels sprouts and dandelions. My dad was Greek, and we lived in a suburban community. And in the springtime, my dad would go around the yard and he'd get all the dandelions and he'd bring them in the house and he'd steam them up and boil them, and he'd mix them up with garlic and oregano and garlic and oregano. And dandelions, right? What are we doing? We're giving our gut great prebiotics to feed the good bacteria, and giving natural herbs and botanicals to make sure that we keep a healthy gut microbiome. So dandelions really good, artichokes really good, konjac root with glucomannan is really good prebiotic. So I want to not just treat the organism, I want to create a really healthy gut microbiome that has a healthy immune system that will prevent further disease down the road.
Yeah. So really it's about not only killing the bug, because often in traditional medicine, we're like,
just kill it.
Kill the bug. Okay,
and
see you later.
Carpet bomb it and let's move on.
Forget it. And the problem is that most people's gut don't get back to normal on their own. And I often see this even with celiac patients. They will be told, oh, you have celiac, don't eat gluten, but they still struggle for years with all kinds of digestive issues that they cannot handle certain foods, or they have bloating or gas. And it's even after they've eliminated gluten. So you really have to go through this whole gut restoration program. We talked a lot about on the podcast, but it's such a key part of functional medicine, this 5R program where we get rid of the bad stuff, foods, bugs, whatever. And then we kind of put in the good stuff and help the body kind of repair and heal.
Yeah.
So that's really an incredible approach. And we've seen patient after patient who've had amazing, and I've come across really crazy things. I've seen people with schistosomiasis from Africa, and I've seen people with endemia histolytica, and I've seen a lot of parasites. Blastocystis is one of the most common ones. And it's often thought to be not a pathogenic one, so it's not bad. But it often does cause symptoms. And if people have symptoms and they have blastocystis and they have irritable bowel, I tend to treat it.
Absolutely.
Do you want to know my secrets for living a long and happy and healthy life? Well, all I have to do is check out my weekly newsletter, Mark's Picks, where I share my favorite tips for health, longevity, well-being, and lots more. Check it out, and link below. So let's sort of jump to this final topic, because I think that it's such an interesting topic.
Right.
And it has to do with worms.
Yeah.
So look, we all co-evolved with living with all these bugs.
Yeah.
And we had them and they live with us. What's interesting is that, in the advent of sort of modern civilization, we've become over-sanitized and we've lost the contact with the natural world. And I think we've seen this uptick in allergies, in asthma, in autoimmune diseases, in inflammatory diseases.
MS, rheumatoid arthritis, psoriatic arthritis.
And all these diseases. And the question is why?
Right.
Because when you go to the developing world, or you go to a hunter-gatherer culture, they don't have them.
No.
There's just no allergies, no asthma. And I was thinking about the other day, I grew up every summer spending 3 months on a ranch with horses and poop and outside and being dirty all the time.
Absolutely,
and the dirt
man.
and sleeping
Couldn't
outside. And being outside, and I don't have a single allergy or anything. And I think, there's this whole phenomena where you see kids who grew up on farms don't get allergies and autoimmunity.
Oh, man, if mothers today saw what you and I were doing when we were kids, mucking around in creeks, holding on to salamanders, feeding, we had a horse farm near us, and, I would feed the horses, apples through the fence, and they're licking my hand, and, mothers today would be freaked.
Right, exactly. So we've sort of over-sanitize ourselves. And there's a number of books like the Epidemic of Absence we mentioned. It really talks about this. And there's some really good science behind using worms, reintroducing worms into the body. And when you look at the part of the immune system that has us deal with worms, it's the same part of the immune system that helps us deal with allergy or asthma, which is fascinating to me because it's it has nothing better to do because it was supposed to be fighting the worms all the time and keeping everything under control. But if you don't have the worms to fight, all of a sudden the direction gets turned on you and your body starts dealing with attacking,
exactly,
becoming more allergic or autoimmune related.
So there's an interesting observation. There's observational study that looked at people with autoimmune diseases in sub-Saharan Africa and in underdeveloped countries, and they looked at those in regards to the severity of disease, progression of disease, and response to treatment compared to developed countries like the U.S. And they found that those patients in sub-Saharan, and they compared it along the lines of like the load of parasites. And they found that the patients in sub-Saharan Africa, and the hypothesis is that it's because of the parasites, they have their disease, their rheumatoid arthritis is less severe. It progresses more slowly, and it responds better to therapy versus developed countries where there's less parasites. And we have this, the operation of the hygiene hypothesis where we just live in too sterile of an environment that our immune systems just are, like you said, are going to get confused, and they're more likely to have an autoimmune response in response to something that's coming through the system that they maybe should not even respond to. That's called immune tolerance. Your body actually has to have immune tolerance. You have to tolerate your own antigens, but you have to tolerate the antigens of other organisms, because if you're responding to everything that comes through your body, then you're going to be constantly inflamed. Mm-hmm. So your immune system has to have a mechanism by which it can appropriately tolerate organisms. Mm-hmm. And in that particular setting, those organisms that are being tolerated may be doing something good for us. Yeah. So if we're having immune tolerance for a parasite that isn't harming us, it's getting some benefit, but it's creating compounds that actually modulate and balance our immune system, that's a win-win.
Yeah. So I know this sounds completely wacky, right?
I know, but it's true.
Dr. Hyman and Dr. George are giving patients worms.
Well, you know
what?
Are
they quacks or what's going on here?
I will bring in a patient and she will sit here and tell you that she is a believer in Hyman therapy because she had severe psoriatic arthritis, and we worked on everything. And her goal was to be able to either come off of or greatly reduce her need for her immunosuppressive Humira. When she came to see me, aches and pains in all of her joints, tired, fatigued, really having difficulties. And I did all of the things that we do and we've talked about on this podcast in functional medicine. But one thing I brought up, I put her on a lot of things that could impact your immune system. Hyman therapy. So I started her on Hyman therapy a year and a half ago. When she was in the worst, she was actually getting better from her pain, but she could not get beyond 2.5 weeks without needing her next Humira. Started on Hyman therapy, helping her to get to that goal. She can go every 6 weeks before she needs a Humira shot. Yeah. And that started once she started the Hyman therapy. So she's incredible. Getting parasites. She's getting helmets. She's getting these worms. She takes them in capsules. We get them from a really, high level company, and it really does work.
It does, and I would say I've been shocked, and I use it very selectively. And I have patients who are really struggling, and the usual functional medicine stuff doesn't work. And I think that I've been shocked at some of the things I've seen. I had this one kid who was on the autistic spectrum, but he was also extremely allergic. And he had really high levels of IgE, which is the antibody against sort of allergens when you have allergies, like asthma allergies. And I told him, I said, look, I don't know if this is going to work. I think the risk is very low. We use rat tapeworms, which sounds gross, but they don't actually take up residence, and they don't actually cause any real problems long term. They just pass through, but they can help regulate immunity on the way in. You want to try them? She's like, sure. Well, was it really a miracle? This kid not only had a reduction in all his symptoms and allergies and everything, but his IgE levels, which normally should be like under 100, were 1,000. and it came down to normal
Wow.
on this therapy.
Wow.
And I've had other people that have autoimmune diseases,
That's
autistic
amazing.
kids. It's really quite striking.
Yeah.
So there's something to it. You have to pick the right patient,
Absolutely.
and we'll figure it out. But
I just think that in functional medicine, the idea is that, it's not like, we just decided, oh, you know what, there's nothing else to do. Let's just, I heard about, witch doctors in Africa using helminths. I think I'll try that. There's a lot of research. I think we pride ourselves here at the Ultra Wellness Center in getting to the root cause, but really combing the literature for real data that says, it helps us find new therapies that are going to be beneficial. And so we do that. And there is a lot of studies that support helminth therapy in reducing the severity of symptoms and response to medication in people with rheumatoid arthritis, psoriatic arthritis, MS, and asthma.
if you love that last video, you should check out the next one for sure on getting to the root cause of all disease.
We're in this complex living environment where nutrition matters, where environmental toxins, this is 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And they probably wrote that